today is all about the animated series, not Lower Decks, but Star Trek, the animated series. So let's jump right into it from the very beginning. This animated series was first proposed in 1969 during the third season of what we now think of as TOS, the third season of Star Trek. So how did this come about? Who brought up the ideas? Who did they pitch it to? Who said, no, that's crazy?
Well, Gene did respond with, no, that's crazy, because of what they wanted to do. They, I believe that Lou Scheimer from Filmation was friends with Gene. And so they pitched the idea of doing a kind of a Starfleet Academy where they had the ship called the Excalibur, and all of the Starfleet or Star Trek characters had a child kind of like a protege that they were teaching, except for Chekhov, which was interesting because he was young, so he wouldn't have another like Starfleet person to take care of. But and he also ended up not being in the actual animated series, so that was good. He got eliminated from the show that didn't even happen. But no, so they wanted to do this as an educational thing. It was going to run on Saturdays concurrently with the original series. They did a bunch of sketches. They said that they drew each person connected to the characters, and they had a very American boy looking person for Kirk. They had a Vulcan named Steve, which I think is a joke. I do not believe that actually is what it was called, but so many people over time just like, I don't know, it's Steve. So we always call him Steve. So we can give him a little bit of a Vulcan name. Yeah. But yeah, so Gene did not react well to that. He didn't want it to be a kids show. He didn't want it to be cheesy. He said, if they're going to do Star Trek, we want to do Star Trek. So it just sort of went by the wayside. And obviously that was also the year that the original series ended. So, but yeah, so that would have been a really interesting show, I think, had it happened. I don't even know what like the animation would probably be, even more primitive than what we ended up with. So yeah, I think
it's interesting you say that it was pitched as a Starfleet Academy show, because every time we hear that there's going to be a new Star Trek show, that idea comes back up. Is it going to be a Starfleet Academy show?
Yeah, and it never is. I think the closest we got is actually just seeing Starfleet Academy in movies or in TV shows. So yeah, no, they had all the sketches, they had everything, but that idea didn't die. It was just, I know that Lou just kept kind of, poking him every once in a while. And I think it wasn't until 1972 when they had the next meeting. It was during the big, not EchoCon. What was the name? It
was during the 1972, the first Star Trek convention,
right,
in New York City,
where they planned on 300 or 400 people and maybe 500 tops, and got 3,500.
Yeah, so I could talk about just that event for this whole hour, but yeah, that was organized by fans who called themselves the Committee. Deborah Langston was a big name in that. Jacqueline Lichtenberg, that was also the con, excuse me, where she founded the Star Trek Well Committee, which lasted, into the 90s. That was a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. It was that convention in New York in January of 1972. And
Gene was there. So
Gene was there. Yeah, the story that I have heard as it relates to the animated series is that NBC wanted this meeting, but Gene didn't want to fly out to New York just to have this meeting, because that would show that he wanted it too much. So he sort of used the convention, being a guest at the convention, as a bit of an excuse to say, oh, well, while I'm in New York, why not?
Well, what had happened was BC had, by this point, the original show was in reruns. It's doing very well in syndication, and networks, local affiliates are preempting primetime programming and running Star Trek reruns in their primetime slots to compete against other primetime shows and winning their time slots in some of these markets. And NBC somehow decided that, when they canceled the show, they thought it was a ratings failure. But when they reran it against the numbers as they really wanted, in terms of, how it was appealing to certain demographics, they realized it had hit the sweet spot all the time. It was almost a bullseye. And so they wanted more Star Trek, but by that point, the cost of basically rebuilding everything and recreating effects and all that sort of stuff was prohibitive. The animated series then became a more viable option.
Yeah. It was something like they needed 4 episodes, guaranteed at least, to make all the sets back, because the sets had been dismantled at that point, $750,000 something to rebuild them, and it was pretty crazy.
I mean, they pay that much for bagels now, but
you're right.
That's one of the great things about having an animated show, though, especially when you're dealing with sci-fi, right? Is because it costs the same no matter what you draw. Right?
Well, Gene was totally excited about that too. When the show actually did move forward and they talked to the writers, they're like, just let your imagination go wild. And his big thing was always volcanoes and lava for some reason. That was just, I don't know, that was apparently really cost prohibitive to do live, but he was just like, oh, can we throw a volcano in there? So if you see volcanoes and stuff in there, just remember Gene was very excited about that.
That's amazing. Another big thing I think we need to talk about when we talk about the genesis of this show is its casting. And I think this is a story that has gotten a little bit more play in recent years, since Leonard Nimoy's passing. But when they brought the cast on to do the animated series, it wasn't everybody, right? It was Nimoy and Shatner and Jimmy Doohan and Majel Barrett.
Yes.
I think so, yeah. Wasn't D. Kelly part of that?
Yes, and D. Kelly. Yeah. You're absolutely correct.
I'm just saying, I know there's one missing somewhere in there.
Let me rattle them off. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just in my brain. But it was Nimoy who said, no, it should be all of us, or at least the group of us that started together.
Well, and also just he's this is a show ostensibly about diversity, and you're getting rid of 2 of the most diverse voices that we have, literal voices at that point. So we don't want to have some other person voice these characters. That's what they were going to do. The characters were still going to be there. They were just going to have Majel or someone else just do their voices. Which
speaking specifically, we're talking about, of course, Uhura and Sulu.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and that's what they did on a lot of this was a time where live action was turning into cartoons pretty regularly. Had I Dream of Jeannie, the Brady Kids, Emergency 4, it was Emergency Plus 4. It was based on the Emergency TV show. Yes. And they had pretty much all the original voices, except for, I think, an I Dream of Jeannie. So the idea of having some of the original voices and then not was a little bit odd too, on top of it, just from an animation standpoint.
But you mentioned Star Trek as a show about diversity, but from my understanding is that Filmation, the animation studio, was also pushing this, especially for the early 70s.
Yeah, they were pretty big into having diverse casts and shows. If you watch Fat Albert, that was one of their things. So it was just inner city world, just different stories that you might actually get than on a regular kids have a talking fill in the blank and it solves crimes. It's like, this was actually stories that related to people's lives. And later, a few years after this, when they had the live action superhero shows with ISIS and Shazam, and they would cover a lot of these sort of stories, and they had a multiracial cast. They did that with some of the space shows. Was it Star Command and Arc 2 was another show, but yeah. So they had, and they also had the first, I believe, Black female superhero on television. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, 78 or something like that. So a little ways after this, but this was at the beginning of them really taking that core idea seriously.
And that shows because it's in the animated series that we finally see Uhura take command of the ship.
Twice.
Not once, but twice. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. She, we spoke with Nichelle a few years back, and I, asked her about this, and she's like, she kind of has me come in closer, and she's like, I've been trying to get back into that chair ever since. So I had this great little moment with her. So she was super excited when she read the script. Apparently she was just like, finally. So yeah. That was part of it. And if you go off and you see other cartoons of the same era, Hong Kong Phooey, or they're either taking stereotypes and playing them up, or just I think the Brady Bunch had some sort of, women can do whatever men can do, but it was so pointed out as opposed to just being a thing. I feel like this was exponentially, storytelling wise, just so much better. I believe it was a critic for the LA Times declared the show was as out of place in Saturday morning kids shows as Mercedes is in a soapbox derby. So it was, so it was definitely a thing of itself, or set apart.
That goes back to what Gene wanted back when we were talking about when it was first proposed in 1969, that he didn't want it to be a goofy kid show. And that was something that Dorothy Fontana said all the time as well, that this is not a kiddie show. These are Star Trek stories. And Dorothy Fontana, who really was like the I guess, executive producer, right? She
should have been the showrunner if we had using that term from today, if that was a term. Yeah.
She was the one who was really in charge of the show.
Yeah. I mean, Gene saw all the scripts, but she was day to day. She was there in the office and doing stuff. Yeah.
And she's the one who considers or says that the animated series is really the original series, season 4.
Correct.
Well, good enough for me.
She basically.
Yeah.
Right? No, that's what we've said. That's always, we can talk about that when we get to canon, but that's been a discussion among fans, and there's all these different reasons why it may or may not be considered canon, but we have an answer to that one too, finally. But when she said that, I'm like, okay, she worked on the show. She was involved with everything, early on, what people were doing. Like, I take her word, even more so than Gene at that point, because Gene was he was getting all sorts of people in his ear telling him about, people won't take you seriously if you connect yourself with a cartoon, that kind of a thing. So I think knowing what her original thought process was and how she felt about it, I felt that was the most authentic response.
For sure. And just like they did with Star Trek, when it first was coming to TV, they showed the animated series first to some fans at some conventions.
Yes.
And in some cases, that went really well. In some cases, it did not go as well. My favorite thing that I recently learned from Aaron is that there was a fan petition after one of these screenings claiming that, quote, it's not real Star Trek.
I feel like I've heard that before.
The more they stay the same.
Yeah. It's funny because you hear people like, well, the first time that people started having problems with Star Trek is when they didn't have Kirk, Spock, and McCoy on TNG. Like, nope. The very first new Star Trek had that same problem. A lot of people saw the intro and it looked so much like the original series. They're like, okay, I feel safe with what you're doing. You've got actual Star Trek writers. You've got the voice actors. I know it's not going to be a goofy show, but there are other people who are just so invested in seeing Star Trek come back to television. Or interesting to me that I didn't know this at the time. People were like, or a movie. It's like, you're going to ruin the chances for it to be a movie. And I didn't think anybody was thinking of it being a movie that soon. Even Gene at that point, it was like kind of sort of in the back of his mind, it sounded like, but it wasn't. I think it got pushed forward as people started mentioning that more and more. But yeah, no, that was crazy. And there was also, we found out that someone was going to take out ads in newspapers to basically do the same thing. Write your, and the same way that they wrote to try and save the show, this was right to try and stop the show. So I just, it's like today, we were saying a lot slower. Everything was just, done in magazines or in letters or, so it's the exact same sort of fan reaction. Just we're at hyperspeed now. It
went from print to message boards to email lists that you maybe checked once a day. And now it's on social media. So it just gets faster. It just doesn't change though.
It's going to be a blitvert pretty soon. Follow you Max Headroom fans. We straddle all of the fandoms. But
the critical reaction, forget the fan reaction, the critical reaction was pretty much positive across the board.
Yeah, no, it was really pretty good. The New York Times said it was, I think they used a similar phrase of the Mercedes in a soapbox derby. So yeah, people were very impressed with the level of storytelling, especially Yesteryear, which was the second episode shown, at least in the rest of the country. In LA, it was out of order because George Takei was running for office, and they considered that as part of his public exposure. So if he had a line on the show, they couldn't play it in LA until the elections were over.
So could they not rerun old Trek episodes either?
I don't know. I'm guessing.
I heard that story too.
Huh. Well, I don't know, but I know that the TAS order was different. But but because of Yesteryear was a story of Spock's childhood and being teased, and then it ultimately ending up with the death of a pet. That was advanced storytelling for television for kids, and they were really worried that they were going to get a lot of feedback that was negative about it, and mostly it was positive from the fans. And out in that's back when you would have somebody call the NBC switchboard and complain about why is this on my TV, which I suppose they still do in a way.
To this day, I don't think I've seen that kind of story, a dealing with the death of a pet story, told any better especially in a cartoon, possibly on TV at all.
Yeah, I think so. And it's we'll talk about this later, but it has affected a lot of his life after that too. And
while we're on our critical reaction, our critical reception, to date, the animated series gave the Star Trek franchise its only Emmy win, I believe.
For non-technical. I mean, they get a lot of technical stuff, but it's the one that's nominated for best show or best actor or something like that. Yeah, to the date. That's
and up to that point, it was, and up to that point, it was also the first one that they won. Period. They'd been nominated a couple times for other things, but this was the first for story.
I was saying, Nimoy was not recommended during the original show all 3 seasons for best actor or best supporting. I forget if it was best actor or best supporting actor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was, but the show itself never was. So this was a high point for Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a funny story about that too. The whole Emmy Award at that time was on a boat in the middle of New York Harbor. It was first thing they tried, the first time they tried it and the last time they tried it. So they got out there and all the celebrities are making jokes like, "Hey, we have you as a captive audience now." And people were like, you just hear in the back, like very low response. So Lou Scheimer, president of Filmation, is kind of wandering around, and his son comes up to him and says, "I heard when I went to the restroom that Captain Kangaroo won. We didn't win." So he's like, "Oh, okay." So that was his cue that he could just drink. He didn't really have to. He wasn't going to give a speech or anything. He was very inebriated when they announced that Star Trek won. And you see this woman kind of leading him up, kind of like arm candy, but it's not because she's just trying to look pretty and he needed help getting up on stage. So, but he was very happy that they won. He kind of wished that it was for Fat Albert, just because the story I think that they chose wasn't maybe as good as Yesteryear or something like that. But it was still a big honor that they were very excited about, especially when they didn't think they had won.
It's the most fun. Also, the inability to leave an award show is possibly the worst thing.
Emergency dinghies maybe or something.
I've only been to a handful, but I'm ready to go halfway through. Anyway. I want to move on to our part 2 of how we've split up our panel today and talk about the myths and legends associated with Star Trek the Animated Series. The first one, it's a little bit of a joke, but not really, is that the show doesn't exist.
Yeah, that when I did my podcast back in 2016, we had a survey about what were the things that you remember about the animated series, and somebody added, "There's an animated series ? So there were people who didn't know, and even if you, especially in the 80s, I remember the show, but unless you could get to the library and find a book where it was listed, or if it was rerunning somewhere, it was very hard to prove that it existed. There wasn't a lot of merchandise that came from it. There's a few things like this Viewmaster from of the Spock's. They didn't call it Yesteryear. It was Mr. Spock's Time Trek. But they there was just not a lot of proof that it existed. And then in 2006, it did come out on DVD. And that's when it was also reinstated on StarTrek.com and stuff. So at that point, it was a lot easier to find that information. But before that, you know, it was on DVD. It was a Blu-ray, not Blu-ray. What am I saying? Laserdisc, old-fashioned Blu-ray. In fact, I have Dayton's Laserdisc that I have at my house. And we're still trying to. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, before the Laserdisc, there were novelizations of the episodes.
Yes. And Dayton, you know something about that.
Yeah, there were 10 of them. There were 10 volumes and just to adapt 22 episodes. And I think it was by volume 6 that he realized he had 5 books to write and only 5 episodes left to adapt. But the contract called for 10 of these. So, and he had already begun doing things like stringing the first half a dozen books or the first 5 or 6 books were 3 episodes. And he found a way to connect the dots with those 3 episodes. Mm-hmm. And then by the time he got to the last back half of the contract, he had 1 episode per book, and he was literally pretty much just writing an original story, with the characters. By that point, the episode itself would inform the larger story that he would craft, and that's how he managed to muscle through those last few books in that series. But they are, in the days before VCRs and video on demand and the internet, novelizations of popular TV shows was how you revisited your favorite TV shows and your favorite characters. So, and of course, the original series has a long history of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it was it's an interesting artifact. But like reference books of the time, magazine articles of the time, they would always talk about how the original show ran for 3 seasons and was canceled, and then came back in 1979 with a motion picture. And we're like, whoa, stop the Trek train. You forgot something. Hardcore fans knew about it because I watched it. I watched it on TV on Saturday mornings. Yes, I'm that old. I got to watch it on Saturday mornings. And then they reran it, I think, on Nickelodeon in the early 80s, I want to say. Yep. And then when when VCR started coming around, they had them out on VHS tape. I think they had a couple of episodes per tape, and then the laser discs, and then finally, it's an implant in the back of your skull for augmented reality now, or whatever it is that we're up to.
But even if the VHS or the laser disc or the DVD existed, it wasn't talked about, so it wasn't really known. Like I think a lot of fans, younger fans or newer fans, didn't know it existed, so they didn't know to go looking for it until the age of streaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
But
with the books as well, one thing I just remembered is that I think the few stories he didn't have scripts for. He had like the story outlines, from what I understood. Or then is that correct, Dayton? Or am I?
He may have had early versions of the scripts. Usually they give him.
Or maybe. You're right. Sorry, early versions. Yeah.
He would have
because
if
you read
of the script, so.
Yeah, there's one, I think one of our planets is missing. Chekhov is mentioned several times in the early drafts of the script, which also read like a science book. It was just a little, that was the one that I had read of an early script where it's like, I didn't feel like anything was lost when they changed it. Other ones are like, oh, that was a really interesting idea. I guess I can see why you truncated it, but I really would like to have seen that. This was not that. This was very dry. But he was in there, and I think they hadn't let the writer know that, or he didn't know that Chekhov was not part of the story, but he did show up in the book. So
the next note I have in our list of myths to bust or confirm is the rumor that the reason that Tribbles were pink is that the art director for the show was colorblind.
Well, there's a little bit of truth to that. He was colorblind in a way. Not as extreme as not knowing what pink was compared to other things. I think it was just one specific color. But that actually is not true. The colorist, Irv Kaplan, is the person who was in charge of choosing all of the colors. And that was his palette: pink, purple, and green. Those were the colors that he loved, because if you watch Filmation shows all the way through to, like, say, He-Man, those colors pop up. And that's how I first started researching this question. I was just like, okay, as a graphic designer myself and worked in companies, by then someone would have said, hey, dude, I know you're colorblind or whatever. I'm not going to have pink pants for my He-Man character or whatever. So that's when I'm like, okay, something's not quite right. And we got to speak with Bob Klein, who helped us quite a bit with the book. He was one of the storyboard artists, and he created like 85% of the aliens and ships. But he said that that Irv, that was just kind of his thing. And people would say, well, let's check. He's like, no, that's what it is. So, and Filmation was very stratified. It wasn't like today, if you work at a company where you're like, oh, I'm going to just go ask so-and-so a question. You went to your director, and if that question seemed like it was deemed good enough to ask somebody else, then they would go take that. You would never just walk over to the colorist or walk over to the person doing the painting, the coloring in the cell. So that's why some of the interesting things of like Vulcan has a moon, which it doesn't. That sort of stuff got in because there just wasn't the gatekeeping or the ability to go and speak with other people.
Well, and something that sort of follows this, that we know the Tribbles were pink, we know the Kzinti were in pink and purple spacesuits, and something that's sort of become a rumor is that Larry Niven, who wrote the Slaver Weapon, right,
Yep.
Was upset about the color of the Kzinti spacesuits, and it's something that Dorothy Fontana herself sort of perpetuated in saying that I apologize to Larry.
Yeah, no, we spoke with him and he's just like, I've tried to tell her before. It's like, if you go back and read the description of a Kzinti spaceship from a couple years before in his, what is the book? Oh, crap. It's from his Known Space series. And a Ring World, if you read that, the ship has pink in it. There's like pink parts of the outside. And he said the planet, the Kzinti home planet, has multicolored plants and everything. I didn't find a problem with it at all. I think it fit. So he was fine with it being pink. So I think that was a funny thing to find out, that we hadn't been like, we weren't searching for that. We're just like, oh, we talked with Dorothy and she said this, and he's like, no.
Oh my. All right. Well, one of my favorites, this one is going to be myth confirmed, is that a lot of the art that we see in the animated series is inspired by fan art from the zines.
Yes.
That were released by fans and distributed by fans in the time that there was no Star Trek on the air. And the most notable of those is Aichaya spots Salat from, again, yesteryear.
That was Alicia Austin in one of the fanzines, which Dorothy was like a real fan of her art and had stuff hanging in her house that she had done years later. So there was a connection between those two. But yeah, I think she probably brought in the fanzine, which I have somewhere, but I don't have it on me. It looks very similar. Yes. And it even has like the weight of the Salat, and they like what it eats. It just had this. It was really a deep dive into what it was. I don't believe he had the chipped tooth though. So there is definitely stuff that they added.
Fanzines of that era are a sight to behold, especially because that's how everything is. Everything is so detailed, and like weights and measurements. There's like anatomy in some of them, but especially early on, the ones like sort of before fan fiction became a big part of the zines,
right?
The creative teams participated, right? Mm-hmm. Dorothy would write letters to the fanzines and they'd publish them, and Gene would, and it's just it's fascinating to see the interaction with fans back then.
And a couple of our some of the pieces of art that I think that are in the book even were originally drawn for the fanzines after the fact. So Bob and a couple other artists would, they'd get a question and they like, oh, sure. And then they would like make them something specifically for their, photocopied or mimeographed zine. So it was pretty cool that they were even doing original art for them. Yeah. So, yeah.
Or they'd send them storyboards and things like that. I think there's some storyboard art in several of the zines of that era. I mean, it was very interactive. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I think I've got them. I'm sure I have them. I just don't know where they are. So, because I'm just that guy.
Most of my collection
in the same boat.
Most of my collection is next gen, but I have a couple inside Star Treks over here on the shelf too.
Nice. I can see Dr. Crusher in the background on your shelf.
This shelf, for anyone who might be watching, is every licensed Beverly Crusher and several that are not.
Nice.
Anyway, going from Beverly Crusher to my other favorite person in Star Trek, Majel Barrett. One of our myths is that a lot of people think that Lara, I forget now, in The Jihad is voiced by Majel Barrett, Roddenberry. And she's not.
No. Well, it was Lara. But it
Fun
depends. No, and the shows, we have the whole Orion thing. So like pronunciation wasn't really at their the front of their mind. No, but she was going to be doing that character and had morning sickness with your boss, Rod, Roddenberry. So she was not able to go that morning. And so they had, last
Jane
name's Webb. Jane Webb. Thank you. Jane Webb, who was in the Fantastic Voyage, some of the other Filmation shows, came in and voiced her. So, in fact, I think along the ways we have that, and then a lot of the first photos of Rod are taken by the animated series PR person, Fred Bronson. So, or they called the LA Times and said come out and take these pictures. So I think that's kind of fun.
All right, and the last thing, well, my next to last thing, I should say, for this section of our panel is sort of, in general, the art department shenanigans.
Yes.
From putting themselves in the background to the apparent missing body parts that show up every now and then to a certain shot of Dr. McCoy relieving himself. So this is all Aaron.
Okay, let me start with I will start with the idea of them being in the show. So yes, if you watch Territon Incident, towards the end when they are helping them out and bringing the dilithium crystals back up to the ship, you will see a guy in glasses and two other people that look too detailedly drawn to just be random background characters. So I've always wondered who they were, and it turns out that it's Herb Hazelton, Bob Klein, and Robert Jensen, I believe, who were storyboard artists. So they just sort of put themselves into it. And at one point, David Gerrold is also in the More Tribbles, More Troubles. He is a transporter operator. But to my eye, because they were drawing 1973 David Gerrold, it does not look like him to me. But I also know him now. So yeah. So there's that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No. Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say now. See? No.
Okay. Fine. The missing body parts, that actually is partially, occasionally, yes, there's an actual blooper, but a lot of times, because you have so many layers, you only have like 6 layers of animation cell. This is back before computers, people. And you would take pictures and you layer them and you move. So however many parts were moving, the more moving parts you had, the fewer layers down you could go as far as like adding more. Like you couldn't have like several pieces of hands, and everything didn't move independently. So occasionally, to get the animation that they want, they would leave off a layer just because for photography. And I think it's just as the layers get stacked on top of each other, they get more and more dense. I mean, it's seen through the plastic is harder and harder. So you get to the point where if you put too many on top of each other, it would just, one, you would see the dimensions, and two, it just would look kind of, the colors would all be off on different pieces. It would very much look like you had different body parts cut. So what they did is they would just leave off like a part that you hope they wouldn't see. Like maybe the bottom of the screen, there's one of Scotty where he has no pants, just no torso or anything. Because he's like doing a lot of it.
Pants, just like
it's just no literal legs. Yes. Yeah. Where I don't know why they couldn't have just then cropped it up a little higher, but I think a lot of this is done very quickly. The turnaround time on these episodes were kind of amazing. When you look at it, it has a very handmade quality because it was all done by hand, and very quickly. So yeah, so they said that the worst one though was like Fat Albert, because they would have classroom scenes where they're all throwing papers and doing things, and then you just notice somebody doesn't have an arm, or there's like, you know, a head missing in the background, which is terrifying. In fact, to say like when Spock is wrestling the Lamont, no, it's, I can't remember the name, the Vulcan cougar, basically, and he grabs his head, and for a half a second the head just disappears, and it's just like a neck, and it's it's just very weird. But that was just from all the animation. So, and the last one that you mentioned was McCoy relieving himself in Once Upon a Planet. They did this to try and make sure that the censors were actually paying attention. They had the guy who would come in and review all of the episodes on the Moviola. And I think that they were playing a trick on him, because they didn't even know if he was paying attention. Like, are they just arbitrarily making decisions? So there's a scene where he's got his hands on his hips and he's turned around and he's looking at this plantation house, which is also just troublesome now. So he's standing there, and there's just a yellow line coming clearly that he is just peeing. And so the guy's like, yeah, everything's good. He goes, did you actually go back and look at, he's like, oh my, no, you can't have that in there. It's like, no, it was just a joke on the Moviola. So yeah, so there was this, unfortunately I guess fortunately, it did not make it into the show. That would have been interesting. So yeah, so that was a fun inside gag. The groups all feel like they were all pranksters internally, because they would always do something to somebody else's desk or something, and just, you know, put not bubble wrap, but like plastic wrap around everybody's chairs and things like that. So yeah.
Well, we have one more myth, and that leads us into our final section of the panel. Before we start that, I do just want to remind everybody that we are live. So if you have any questions, type them into that Facebook chat. And once we get through some of our next canon connections, we will answer as many questions as we can. So final myth is that this is not canon.
I think Dayton can carry some of this.
Well, I mean, the idea of what is and isn't canon is relatively recent. I mean, it really didn't start to become a thing until Next Gen. I mean, back before that, there was just Star Trek and Star Trek movies and Star Trek merchandise. And I don't know that anybody really cared about what is or is not canon. But because of the way the rights were held up by the animated show for Filmation and everything, I think that was one way of just sort of disassociating Roddenberry from those, as far as what he wanted to do with Star Trek when Next Generation came around. Then we started getting here about what's canon, what's not. The novels aren't canon, the comics aren't canon, the book, all that stuff is not canon. Only Gene Roddenberry Star Trek is canon. And that myth persisted for a long time, even though writers on Next Generation would find subtle ways to make references to certain animated components. And then when DS9 came along, they would rub it in a little bit more. And then I think after Viacom or whoever was running the show at that point in time got back the rights to the animated show, that's when the idea of it possibly being canon was entertained. But as far as the writers of the shows and the writers of the ancillary material like the comics, everybody else seemed to be okay with the animated show. I mean, Maress and Eric's appear in certain runs of the comic books back in the 80s and the 90s until that got clamped down by people at Paramount. And then, once again, people would start sliding in the little references and every wink and a nod. The people who caught the joke would get it and enjoy it. And then finally, we're to today, where the people who are currently running Star Trek and making new shows have all but, held it up and baptized it. It's like, it's canon. It's just as canon as everything else. Now, that comes with some problems because there are questions by what the animated show brought about. But, Star Trek fans are pretty smart. They figure out ways to make it all make sense.
Yeah. Well, you've done that in some of your books too. You brought in elements, not canon elements, but but into your stories where you're one of my favorite parts of the animated series are ships and designs and stuff. There's the USS or the SS Bonaventure, which technically doesn't have a whole lot of time. The time doesn't make sense even within the animated series framework. So the first ship with warp drive is not what it is. It's just not that. We know that from history. But as Dayton, as I think you have done in one of your books and something that I've mentioned, it's the first ship with modern warp drive. So it's the warp drive that can go warp 7 and greater. And I think that,
I think we called it some sort of like a further generation of the original warp design that Cochrane came up with. We tried to massage it. I mean, there are definite roadblocks to getting it all to fit, but that's what you do. That's what fans have done. Fans have spent decades making it make sense. So I usually have more faith in fandom in terms of, y'all used to be able to do this on your own. Why do we have to speed through everything to now? So,
there's a lot to get through with 53 years of content, man.
But the fact that it holds together as well as it does after all this time and after all the people who've had their hands in it is really remarkable when you start to think about it.
But
I think because the fans are so obsessive, that probably helps keep it a little tighter than maybe other shows might be.
But some of the things that we think of as like,
I would argue that's true,
staples of 24th century Star Trek originated in the animated series, specifically the holodeck.
Yes.
Right. The first time we see the holodecks, the animated series, the Kirk's middle name is from the animated series, Tiberius. The Cations appear in the TOS films. Now Lower Decks. I know Aaron is flipped when he saw the score in Lower Decks.
Yes. And the Vendorian. The Vendorian was beautifully done too. I like how they simplified it a little bit, but it just looked like, no, that looks better. It's the first time I'm like, nope, I'll take that design. But yeah, no, it was great because there's a fluidity to the animation that they can do now that was just not possible with the time that they had back then. So, but yeah, no, there's so many things. The holodeck was called the Rec Room. It was in the oh my gosh, my brain has just died. The Practical Joker. It's like these things I can repeat in my sleep until I actually have to do it.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, and it was a transporter malfunction, holodeck malfunction episode on top of it. So not only do we see it for the first time, it also malfunctions and is giving you a little bit of a setting you up for all the future.
If you're in the holodeck and it doesn't malfunction, is it even a holodeck episode?
Is it even a holodeck? And I think that their holodeck ran on tapes, though, which I thought was hilarious. You could hear it.
Well, I mean, we sort of got that again in DS9 with the Holosuite and Quark with his, I guess they were isolinear chips, right?
Mm-hmm.
He would hand people programs.
Yeah.
Dayton, did you have any favorite callbacks to the animated series?
Oh, so far? Oh God, there's all kinds of stuff. I love the little slight connection that Dax makes with Koloff in the Trials and Tribulation episode. They talk about that, and then it's just little stuff like that. I'm holding out for the life support bill. If we get that, then I know we've achieved full canon status. So I'm holding. Yes. I'm pretty sure it's never going to happen, but I'm going to be a holdout for that. And I love the fact that they wove in Spock's backstory from the animated show into Discovery. I mean, They talk about Amanda, his mom, Amanda Grayson, reading stories to Spock from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and then Burnham has a copy of that book in Discovery. And it's just, if you are familiar with the mythology and you know the show, you got that reference and you can enjoy that. But if you're not a fan, if you're not a hardcore and you don't read it, it doesn't hurt that. It doesn't.
Right.
And that's the key to tiebacks, right?
I love it like that.
That's the key, is that if it's there and you get it, it's just extra, but it doesn't stick out or detract if you don't know what it is. Right? It's not so glaring that you're like, why what is that doing there?
Well, and that's the people who are like, don't want to use it as canon. To me, it's like, you're just removing an extra layer of texture that you can use in this universe that makes it feel more real. You don't have to know what this thing is. You can just mention you. And even one of the comic books, they had talked about the life support belt that somebody had. It's just like they were going through like basically a supply closet, and they're just like, well, these were something they were testing a few years back. And, so it's just like they did bring that, not on a show, but I'm thinking that in Lower Decks, if they ever go to Fallujah, we could just see giant legs walking by in the background, just see giant Spock at some point, just that. because he should be still alive, right? You know, Spock would have been alive at that point.
Should we go to some of the questions that came in?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we have one from our editor even. Lori asked if Lori Ulster. Oh, there it is. In its first run in Canada, wasn't it? I don't know. I don't think that we never ran across any international information. That was actually pretty hard. The only thing that we knew was the syndication going through Nickelodeon and all that. But I don't remember if it was first run in Canada. I almost would say no. Dayton, do you have any information on that?
I have no idea. Good question.
Something for the sequel book. Yeah, no, I'm going to look into that. I actually don't know.
I have no idea.
Well,
okay. Panel over, we failed.
You've stumped it. Yeah, you stumped us. Thanks, Lori.
So our next one is, I have the animated series on DVD. Do you think the Blu-ray is worth it? Did they do a good job putting it together?
Dayton and I actually reviewed that together for Saturday Morning
Track. What I said. I remember saying I remember loving the quality of the picture, but like a lot of productions of that period, Blu-ray isn't always kind to a lot of the productions from the 60s and earlier, because every flaw, particularly in live action show, you'll see every shortcut they took building that set. You'll see every shortcut they took with, wardrobe and makeup and everything else. It just it sticks out. That's just the reality of what HD can do to you. With the animated
TNG,
show,
you can see like screws.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous.
On the pads, yeah.
You can see the makeup line for Nimoy's ears, and the coffee stain on his shirt, that kind of thing. And the stains from where he smoked.
Wow.
But I remember talking about that when we reviewed it. It's so clear. You can actually see brush strokes in the paint on some of those background cells.
Wow.
In a couple of those shots. It's really, really good. I'm a completist, so I bought it. I've been thinking twice. I bought every other version of the original show and the animated show. I will die with whatever the most advanced version of streaming video or hard copy video is. They will throw it in my casket. That's my wife's like, all that crap's going with you when you die. Go. So it'll be with you.
Yeah, if you're looking for higher quality actual episodes, it is worth it. There are no new extras in it, unfortunately, and the extras that are there are not up-resed or anything. They're just what they were on the DVD. So it does come with a set of postcards from Juan Ortiz. He drew, like, each episode had a postcard, basically. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, I would say if you are looking to save money and you have the DVD and you're not like a cinephile or you don't need to see all those brushstrokes, you could stick with the DVD. But I personally love the Blu-ray, just being able to have it. And I think that the same quality is what's streaming now on
CBS All Access.
It's not on Netflix anymore. Yeah, CBS All Access, I believe.
It is.
That's when I first knew that it was up-res. When it was on Netflix at the time. It was just like, wait, this is a lot sharper than I remember it. So yeah, you can see a lot more detail in like the little, when they're showing in the first episode, the Enterprise going up to the organic ship. You can see the detail in the little ship and on the pods that have broken apart. So I think for me, yeah, I would say yes.
And I believe that it is now only on CBS All Access, because I went to watch it on Netflix the other day and it wasn't there. But I mean, that I'm joking, but that might actually be a factor for you as well. If you aren't a subscriber to CBS All Access, or you don't want to have that subscription to watch it. I know you said you have it on DVD, but I mean, maybe that makes the Blu-ray worth it for you. Our next question is also from Brent, who said that, hey, Dayton, Aaron and I both have glommers in the background. Where's your glommer?
It's eating. It'll be here shortly after it eats. So.
Yeah, ours have eaten all of our pink tribbles. Well, no, I guess there's a couple in the background still.
I do have one. It's just over on the other side of my office. So
The best
and
thing,
the cool thing, speaking of canon connections, that was in the background of Kestra's bedroom in Star Trek Picard.
literally
It was one of her
these.
stuffed animals. Yep.
The best thing about these, literally, it's gonna make a Velcro noise, is that
ASMR.
it has a pink tribble inside.
Nice.
It's my favorite thing. Oh.
Those are great. Yeah, and anybody who doesn't know, the Glomer is the genetic creature that the Klingons created to eat Tribbles, which kind of backfires. Actually, I wonder that would be interesting to find out what happened to them. Did they have their own problem of like the Glomers get out of control, or
maybe they found their predator-prey balance, and that's why we haven't really had another Tribble problem since.
There we go. since Dax brought one back to Deep Space Nine in the Trials and Tribulations.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see any more questions. There is a comment about canon becoming important because of Star Wars.
Oh, and the Star Wars books and
yeah, and that was I think the whole the recent anyway blow up with the Star Wars books certainly happened much more recently than Star Trek fans started being very picky about what is and is not canon. But I really mention it.
And about this for years.
But I mean, I know that Aaron knows there is a connection between the animated series and Star Wars.
I do.
And the holiday special?
Oh. That they both have an animated section. There's
Filmation
Nelvana. No, Filmation was not. Nelvana was. But Nelvana is referenced in TNG as a planet, which is a callback to that animation studio. So in a roundabout way. Nelvana 3 was named after the studio that created the animation section of the Star Wars holiday special. And for me, I'm kind of a fan of that too. I think I'm sort of the Lost Cause fan or something. It's just I have the Bonaventure as an ugly ship that no one likes inside of a show that no one wanted to watch with, and phase 2 and some of the other things that didn't happen. I find really fascinating because they're sort of pregnant with possibilities that just didn't happen. And some of them end up, in TNG, a lot of what phase 2, which at the time was called Star Trek 2, because there wasn't a Wrath of Khan, was, that became Deanna Troi and Riker and all sorts of things like that. But so I kind of like the Lost Cause. We were joking beforehand. It's like, I want to write the book about the Star Wars holiday special. I'm only half kidding about that too. So, there's just so many weird things that had to happen for that show to have occurred the way it did. And, Star Trek, the motion picture, was another movie that it's kind of remarkable. It's actually on film and you can watch it because of all of the things that happened in the background.
Reading about the making of specifically, I'll reference the 50-year mission books that, just list quotes from people who were involved in the productions. It is amazing that film happened. Like they were shipping films wet.
Yes.
To theaters to be viewed by audiences. Yeah. Like it's mind blowing. But we are nearing the end of our time.
I do have that one quote when I forgot about the canon. Akiva Goldsman recently did actually mention canon. He said seasons 1, 2, and 3 of the original series and the seasons of the animated series are considered the first 4 seasons of TOS. So that is canon proper, as are all televised or filmed stories. Those are all canon. So that was February 20th, 2020. So we actually did have a real sort of, it's now in stone.
Period.
Yeah. Period. Yes, exactly. I think by now, if you haven't figured it out, yes, it's canon. Whatever that ends up meaning for you.
Any final thoughts today before we say goodbye?
No, I just
other than
well, mine is if you haven't watched these episodes, do it because they're worth your time. They're a lot of fun. They're fast paced, and I'll say the word again, kind of mind blowing at times. What is it? 22 episodes?
Correct.
22 half-hour episodes set aside
You
next
could
Saturday.
binge it in a day. No, yeah, exactly.
You'll be fine.
Don't do that in one day, because you will have the music stuck in your head forever. Because we had to constantly be watching these as we were writing the book, and you just get the da 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 like stuck in your head over and over again. No, it's like they are great, yes. And if you don't like the animation or you can't square yourself with that, just listen to the audio. It's kind of like a radio play in that sense, because it has all the original voices. It's really like stumbling across a season of the original series you didn't know existed.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, where can people find you on the internet and also buy your book?
You can find me at Geek Filter on Twitter and Instagram, and you can buy our Rich Shepis, who was supposed to be here, by the way. I wanted to mention had a family emergency, so he was the instrumental person in keeping all of this glued together. And him not being here, I was like, oh no. I jokingly or half jokingly say that I wrote the book so I don't have to remember all the stuff that's in it. So, but no, you can find the book at Amazon. But if you can find it at a local comic book shop or something, do that, because everybody is really struggling right now, and I would like to see people support their local industries, and Amazon would be fine. So get it where you can get it, but if you if you can, try to get it local.
And Dayton, where can people find you and your books?
You can find me at DaytonWard.com, and that has links to my Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and my author pages on different publishing websites. And I'm like Aaron, if you want to find my books, I wholeheartedly recommend you seek out your local independent bookseller first and exhaust all those options before going to Amazon, because that dude ain't hurting for money.
Once again, agreed. My name is Sue. The best place, if you want to hear more from me, is to just hit up womenatwarp.com. That is my podcast, and it links out to all of our social medias, and you can find me through those. And I don't have any books that I've written. So
next time when we do this, you'll have one. I'm sure.
Fingers crossed. But again, independent, local, family-owned, independently owned bookstores and comic book stores are the way to go whenever you're looking for this stuff. And happy trekking, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Live long and prosper.